Okay, how do I get to the big screen for me?
Okay.
There.
If you go to the bottom where it says screen, oh yeah, I'll take care of that.
Okay, my talk today is about Eugene Bullard, the most amazing guy you never heard about. I wrote a book about him titled Eugene Bullard, World's First Black Fighter Pilot. And let's see if I can, right there. And let's see, I'm still a novice at this.
There we go.
Okay. It's available at bookstores, Amazon, or my publisher, New South Books in Montgomery, Alabama. They print socially conscious books. The theme of my book is not only about Bullard's wartime exploits, but also about his amazing perseverance. From this talk, I hope you'll appreciate what a true American hero is, one who justly deserves recognition, which Bullard did not get during his lifetime. And this is a very short talk, so I can only touch on a very few exploits of his amazing life. Bullard's father, William Octave Bullard, was born in 1863 as a slave on a cotton plantation south of Columbus, Georgia. When Octave reached 19, he married a Creek Indian girl, moved to Columbus, Georgia, and started a family of 10 children. Octave's seventh child, Eugene, was born on October 9th, 1895. And after listening to his father's stories about the freedoms for blacks found in France, he ran away at age 11, first selling his goat for $1.50, and then he headed toward France. He made his way to Atlanta, where he joined some gypsies after finding they traveled around the world, including to France. But after finding it would be another 2 years before they went to Europe, he left and he made his own way to France. After a number of months of working for several people, including as a winning racehorse jockey, he headed to Montgomery, Alabama, and he stowed away on a train headed for Virginia. At Newport News, he found a German freighter headed to Europe, and he stowed away in a lifeboat with a couple bottles of water and a few sandwiches. He was soon discovered and put to work shoveling ashes overboard. He was put ashore in Aberdeen, Scotland, paid $25 for his work, and made his way to Liverpool, where he learned how to box. Now, there in Liverpool, the Dixie Kid, an American boxer, saw Bullard fight and took him to London for more training. After a number of boxing matches, Bullard finally fought in Paris, and he fell in love with the city. Back in England, he joined a circus troupe called the Pickaninnies and toured throughout Europe, passing through Paris on his return trip. He stayed behind in Paris. In the summer of 1914, World War I started, and reality hit Bullard when he started learning about the deaths of his friends who had joined the military. He saw a newspaper article pleading for volunteers, even foreigners. So on his 19th birthday, Bullard lied about his age and enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. His first combat experience was in the Battle of Somme, and he experienced the famous temporary Christmas truce of 1914, and I skipped a slide here. Let's see. Where do I go? How do I make it go down? That's what he looks like in his boxing days. He next fought in the Battle of Artois, where he was one of only 54 out of 250 in his company to survive. Bullard fought, including hand-to-hand combat in many more battles, and he was promoted to corporal for his valor. At Verdun, shrapnel struck him in the face, knocking out most of his teeth. He never gave up, though. A few days later, he was a machine gunner in the Battle of Douaumont and was seriously wounded in his leg by another artillery shell. While recuperating in a Lyon hospital, Bullard was awarded the Croix de Guerre for bravery and helping his fellow soldiers. He wasn't expected to walk again, but why am I having so much trouble with this? And in case you want to, these aren't what you're supposed to see with all this text behind it, but that's what a Croix de Guerre looks like. He wanted to return to combat. He remembered the airplanes flying overhead when he was in the Legion and decided to become an aviation machine gunner. An American boxing promoter friend in Paris by the name of Jeff Dixon bet Bullard $2,000 that he couldn't become an aviator because he was black. He said no blacks were in the flying service and he didn't have a chance. But at aviation school, while training as an aviation machine gunner, Bullard met up with a former fellow Legionnaire, Edmond Genet, who was then a pilot for the Lafayette Escadrille. Genet convinced Bullard to become a pilot instead because it paid $10 more, $30 instead of $20. And how do I get out of, what do I do here to slideshow?
So if you go to slideshow, format slideshow, you'll get the full.
Yeah, first I got to find it. Slides, view slideshow, there we go. Ah, yes, I had it on normal. There we go.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay. Now, it's being squirrely. So he started his training in an airplane like this. They called them penguins. It was had real short wings. It couldn't fly, and he had to learn how to taxi around on a field. But after a number of weeks of training, he passed his final flying exam in, I believe this is the type of plane that he flew in. It looks like a Blériot. They call them chicken coops because they're just sticks and wire. And he earned his wings on May 5th, 1917, and he received the military pilot certificate, 6950. He was given pay for meals or drinks when he was in Paris.
Larry, I think you hit mute. Okay, you're good.
I unmuted.
Yeah, don't mute yourself.
I don't know what I did.
Yeah, oh well, it's okay. Maybe you just want to go back just to couple seconds.
Where did I go mute?
Maybe like one slide before this. Yeah, we got the pilot's license. That's good.
He got the pilot's license, and then he was very resplendent in his uniform, and he discovered he never had to pay for meals or drinks when he was in Paris. Actually, it was a pretty good looking guy. And he then received advanced training in bomber and fighter planes. He transferred to the Avord School of Military Aviation, one of the largest aviation schools in France, for his final training in Newports and SPADs. And this is what a SPAD looks like. Here's some pictures of fellow pilots and dignitaries outside of barracks, and the arrow points to Eugene Bullard. Meanwhile, Bullard noticed that other pilots had animal pets, so he bought a monkey he named Jimmy from a lady of the night in Paris while he was on leave. Eventually, Bullard started noticing that pilots who had arrived after him were shipped off to the front for combat. Turned out there was a villain at play, an influential American in Paris, Dr. Edmund Gross, who helped start the Lafayette Escadrille, disapproved of having a black pilot in the Flying Corps, and he made Bullard's life a living hell for quite a number of years. Finally, someone pulled some strings, and Bullard was then able to fly a number of combat sorties, unofficially downing 2 German planes. Then on April 6, 1917, the U.S. finally declared war on Germany, and the first American troops arrived in France on June 26, 1917. Now it was time for American pilots in France to join the American Flying Service. Bullard's fellow pilots were all promoted to the rank of lieutenant, but Bullard was only promoted to sergeant, which meant that he couldn't fly, because in this country only officers can fly. In November 1917, he was removed from the French flying service and transferred to his old unit, the 170th French Infantry, declared unfit for military camp, where he performed menial tasks until the end of the war. And to make matters even worse, Bullard's Jimmy died during the Great Flu Epidemic in March 1918. And to show you, very sensitive mouse here. Okay, to show you what kind of hero he was, these are his 15 medals. He worked in nightclubs and fought a couple of boxing matches in Egypt, and he learned how to play the drums. And if you Google him, you can find a short clip of him playing the drums in a nightclub. In 1923, he married Marcelle Henriette, a young French high society girl. They had 2 daughters and a son who died in infancy. Come on, come on. There we go. In 1928, Bullard bought the Le Grand Duc nightclub, and he's behind the girl at the bar. He hired a number of famous entertainers, making his nightclub the favorite attraction for the rich and famous. Le Grand Duc was the place to be seen. Even the Prince of Wales and his fiancée were regulars. Hemingway was also a regular, and he mentions Bullard as a black drummer in his book, The Sun Also Rises.
this job. She answered that particular call.
Early 1930s, he sold the Grand Duke and purchased another nightclub and an athletic club. But it wasn't long before France believed that Hitler's Germany once again wanted war with France. So Bullard joined the French underground and listened in on his German customers who thought blacks weren't smart enough to understand the German language. When World War II started, Bullard sent for his daughters and closed his nightclub. He rejoined the French military as a machine gunner. In one battle, he was blown up by an artillery shell, thrown against a wall and gashing his forehead and fracturing his spine. He made his way to neutral Spain and returned to the US by ship, where upon landing, all the Americans aboard were offered a free night of lodging except Bullard. A fellow soldier gave Bullard a few bucks to rent a room that night, and he eventually found an apartment where he lived the rest of his life at 80 East 116th Street. He worked as a security guard in Brooklyn at an army base, and one day, commuting on a ferry, an FBI agent saved Bullard from an angry mob who thought he was disembarking too slowly. The agent also got Bullard a job as a longshoreman that meant more money, so he could afford to bring his daughters to New York. In 1941, his daughters arrived in New York, and they were 13 and 16 years old. In the fall of '42, Bullard received an invitation for a dinner at the New York Paris Hotel for a special event for Paris American Legion members. Shortly before the event, he received an anonymous letter stating, "Your extended sojourn abroad has perhaps made you forget that in the States, white and colored people do not mix at social functions. It would be to your advantage not to attend the dinner on Monday night or to join in any social activities of Paris Post No. 1 in the future." Well, he went anyway, and there was no incident. In 1945, he decided to visit his hometown of Columbus, Georgia, but they treated him very poorly there, and he left and never went back. In September 1949, he went to a concert held by the black entertainer and activist Paul Robeson in Peekskill, New York. As concert goers drove away after the concert, they passed through long lines of hostile locals who attacked them. Bullard himself was knocked to the ground and beaten by the angry mob and a state trooper and 2 policemen with clubs. The incident was captured on film, and you can find that if you look hard. And it can be seen in a 70s documentary called The Tallest Tree in Our Forest, and in the Oscar-winning documentary Paul Robeson, Tribute to an Artist, which was narrated by Sidney Poitier. One time on a bus, Eugene refused to sit in the rear. A fist fight with the bus driver ensued, and Bullard lost most of the sight in his left eye. He had to wear glasses the rest of his life. Let's go, come on. Bullard toured with Louis Armstrong as a French interpreter. In 1954, the French government flew him to France to join in the Bastille Day celebration, where he laid a wreath beside the tomb of the unknown soldier under the Arc de Triomphe. On October 9, 1959, he was awarded the Legion of Honor at the French consulate in New York. In the spring of 1960, Charles de Gaulle gave a speech at the armory of the 7th Infantry Regiment at 643 Park Avenue. And he recognized Bullard in the audience, shook his hand, and embraced him as a French hero. His final job was as an elevator operator in the Rockefeller Center, where his fame as the Black Swallow of Death, which was the his nickname in World War I was unknown, and he always wore his medals while working. Now, a little bit of coincidence there. My wife worked in Rockefeller Center, but if she had started working there just 4 years earlier, she would have seen him. Operator uniform and showing his 15 medals. I'm old enough to remember Dave Garraway. In early 1961, Bullard was diagnosed with intestinal cancer, and he died on October 12, 1961, and was buried in the French War Veterans Cemetery in Flushing, New York. Now, if you notice, there's a wrong date on the stone. He was born in
Larry, we're losing you. Larry, maybe you should stop screen share because we lost you there for a minute. And Malika, I'm going to mute you because.
Am I still?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there was something going on with my Wi-Fi. Let me see.
You're okay now.
Yeah, I'm right at the end here.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah, once again, the book, it's in its third printing. It is now available in paperback at Amazon, your local bookstore, or New South Books. The end. Now, I only touched upon a few highlights. The guy lived an incredible and amazing life. The stuff he did, but he never gave up. And so that's the theme of the book, perseverance. And that's all, folks.
So if anyone has any questions, they could unmute and ask Larry a question. Francis, can you unmute yourself, please, first on the lower left of your screen, if you have a question, Francis?
Yeah, thank you very much. We lost you, and thank you very much for this presentation. And really, from the bottom of our heart, thank you for working on this extraordinary life. We lost you when we saw his grave in Flushing. You said there was a mistake in the date. We couldn't hear what you had to say. But anyhow, thank you so much.
I have to say something.
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't quite hear the question.
The question was, when you were discussing the discrepancy on the date of his tombstone, we kind of missed that part. You don't need to show it again, but just if you can explain.
Yeah, the tombstone shows 1894, but he was born in 1895. He had to lie on his birth date. He was only 19, but you had to be 20 to get into the French Foreign Legion. So that's the discrepancy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Does someone else have a question?
Yes, yes. My question is, do you think Eugene challenged everything in his path in order to prove himself as a black
I should be wearing earphones. Could you speak up louder, John or somebody?
We could not hear you. We could not hear you. John, did you hear the question?
Not completely. Could you repeat again, please?
Yes, I said, do you think Eugene challenged every single thing in his life in order to prove himself as a black man?
I still can't.
So Larry, the question is, do you think Eugene did everything in his life to prove himself as a black man? In other words, do you think that's what inspired him to, I guess, these accomplishments?
You know, I didn't have that feeling. He just wanted to be treated fairly, but I don't think he was trying to prove that he was good just because he was black. He was just a nice guy. He helped people. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Larry, I wanted to just make a comment that I mentioned to my 15-year-old daughter, my youngest child, what the topic of tonight's meeting was. And I mentioned to her that it was an African-American world-class, the first fighter pilot in the world. And she said to me immediately, she goes, "You mean Eugene?" So I said, well, let me check. And I happened to look back at the program or the preview, and I saw that it was, in fact, Eugene Bullard. We happen to be in the Atlanta area. So I have a feeling that my 15-year-old, she is an avid history buff, that she learned this probably in her Georgia state history class, I'm assuming. But I will ask her, but she piped up and she was So long story short, it appears as though Eugene has made his legacy into the youth of today. Your work is tremendous, and we will do our best to seek out your book and read it. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I like to think that my book had something to do about him becoming discovered, because I was telling John earlier that it's just been in the last few years. Eugene is getting a lot of recognition, and
deservedly
I don't know
so.
if it'll come to pass or not, but I just signed a film option on the book. But that's just an option. I haven't bought my Rolls Royce yet.
Congratulate, that's wonderful. That'd be a terrific movie. Great story.
Well, thank you all. Any more questions?
Yes.
Who bought the option?
Did you have a long-standing interest? How did you become aware of Eugene, and what drove you to learn more about him?
Was the question was, how did I become aware of Eugene?
And how did you become interested in writing a book?
I was watching if I'm understanding your question right, I was actively searching for someone to do a biography about, and I happened to watch the 2006 film Flyboys, which was totally historically inaccurate. Be Eugene, and I looked him up, and our library here in Albuquerque had a rare copy of his memoirs, and I read that and I was totally blown away. And so it's the corny thing, you know, I had to write about him, and that's the honest truth. He deserved recognition, and now he's starting to get some.
That's wonderful. I believe Serge Gabriel has a question. Serge?
Another question. I'm 91 years old, and I already made plans to be buried in a cemetery in Long Island. And I served in the French Army. and I was airborne in the French Army. And then when I came to America, I was after it that served in the Korean War. So for almost my life was serving in the military, and I'm still active, and I'm looking forward to meet some of you maybe someday. Thank you very much for the presentation.
And I'm
You're quite welcome.
very,
And good luck. I wish I was there. I'd join you for a drink.
Again, Larry, thank you so much. We're delighted. Thank you all who participated, but it's really inspiring, and I think it's so much of the moment when we take a look back at this incredible talent and see, the way he was perhaps even more accepted in France than in his own state and in his own country. So it's very timely and good lessons learned, and I'm glad to hear that some youngsters have now heard about him too. So that's all is good. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. And
Questions?